Good evening, and you're joining us live this Wednesday for a party political broadcast from the Workers' Party of Britain from the man who needs no introduction, but we'll introduce him anyway, our party leader, George Galloway. Over to you, George.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you, comrades of the Workers' Party who have joined us and friends who are watching but have not yet joined the Workers' Party of Britain. Obviously, we hope to recruit you, but in the meantime, we hope to inspire you and perhaps even as a more limited ambition to make you question more. Personally, I question everything, but everybody could do with questioning more. And that's going to be one of the themes of what I have to say this evening, because there's an extraordinary amount of lack of questioning going on the British left, on the international left for that matter, vividly illustrated by Diane Abbot's tweet this evening, in which she concedes that the United States have been struggling to bring democracy to something she calls the global south over these last years until the Donald Trump interregnum. And the point she's making is that Trump has to be out as quickly as possible so that the United States can get back to bringing democracy to the global south. Leaving aside the very last century, 1980s nomenclature, the very last thing that the United States has been seeking to bring anywhere, never mind the global south, is democracy. To imagine that is to imagine they invaded and occupied Iraq for democracy, Afghanistan for democracy, Libya for democracy, Syria for democracy. The belief that the United States' role in the Ukraine was about bringing democracy, the United States' role in Africa and in Asia, to which continents they brought only disaster over this last period. To imagine that that was about bringing democracy would be idiocy coming from a right-wing don at Oxford University. For it to come from the pen, so to speak, of one of the leading figures of Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet beggars belief, frankly. And I'm going to begin with the United States political situation in my talk this evening. It shouldn't need to be said, but let me say it anyway, in case there's anyone anywhere confused about this. We in the Workers' Party would not vote for either Donald Trump or Joe Biden on pain of execution. Both of them are complete anathema to our politics. We don't, in any case, believe in the choosing of the lesser of two evils. Even if we could agree who amongst Trump and Biden were the lesser of two evils, and that's a highly moot point, we still wouldn't agree with it. Otherwise, why would we exist? We'd just tell people to vote for Keir Starmer. I know it's a joke, but you could make the case that he's the lesser of two evils in relation to Boris Johnson. I'd find it hard to make that case, but you could make that case. It's because we will never choose between the lesser of two evils that we in the Workers' Party exist, because we believe that Johnson and Starmer, Trump and Biden are the wrong direction entirely. And the idea that by backing the lesser of two evils, you somehow improve a situation is, of course, entirely fatuous conceptually. If you back the lesser of two evils, evil always wins. And the next time, the lesser evil can afford to be less lesser evil. You're moving the axis ever more towards pure evil. And so our position is that Donald Trump and Joe Biden are two cheeks of the same backside, just like Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer are. These are simple nostrums, but it's surprising how they need to be restated, because there has been a kind of outpouring of dewy-eyed, like the Diane Abbot tweet this evening, dewy-eyed nostalgia for the Obama, Clinton, Biden gang. This is a gang that expanded George Bush's wars from 4 to 7, that dropped more bombs than George Bush dropped. This is a gang that couldn't shoot straight, that blundered into Libya, turned it into a wasteland, turned the center of Tripoli into a slave market, literally, where you buy black slaves, caused the destruction of a country that, for all its faults, was the richest country in Africa, with a public realm better than any other country in Africa, with a standard of living better than any other country in Africa, turned it into a complete failed state, with several parliaments, several governments, several armies, and tearing itself to pieces and blowing the doors off the gates to the Mediterranean Sea, and the taking to the waters potentially of millions of people fleeing the hell that the imperialist system had created for them, with war, famine, depredation, and disease. The idea that this gang of Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden is something to look back on fondly requires a lack of historical memory of truly extraordinary proportions. It was only 4 years ago that these people were in power. The ugliness of Donald Trump could possibly be described as the empire unmasked. Donald Trump disdained to croon smoothly in the way that Barack Obama did as he murdered and sowed mayhem across the globe. He was like a character from The Sopranos, making no bones about what he was going to do to you. So which is better and which is worse? Which is lesser, which is greater evil? As I've been putting it all week, the only difference between a Biden administration and a Trump administration will be the rainbow flag painted on the fin of the American bombers. And they will not be long in flying. Donald Trump didn't actually start any new wars, though he prosecuted existing wars increasingly bloodily, particularly in Afghanistan. And when he wasn't at war, he was imposing a bewildering labyrinth of sanctions, which are war by other means, and all kinds of economic warfare against some of the poorest people on the earth. He was bombing Yemen, but it wasn't him that started the Yemen war. That was Obama, Biden, and Hillary Clinton. He was strangling Iran with ever tighter rafts of sanctions, but he didn't invade them. He didn't start a war against Iran. And funnily enough, that's the main reason why the deep state in the United States and the deep state of NATO and other countries in the West preferred the old guard to the new. Because Trump they regarded as a maverick, independent, impetuous, wild individual who could not be relied upon to project American power unremittingly across the globe, bringing not democracy to the global south, but imperial domination. Donald Trump, if he has lost this election, and it's not yet clear that he has, there are recounts by hand going on and there are multiple court cases, but the likelihood is that he has lost. And if he has lost, the main reason why he has lost is that he did not extricate the United States from unwinnable foreign entanglements. And above all, he did not bring the jobs back to America that had desertified the former industrial states, now rust belts since the Clinton era, Bill Clinton era, as a result of NAFTA and deindustrialization. Donald Trump promised the people of Wisconsin, of Michigan, of Pennsylvania, that he would bring industry back. He would bring blue-collar, union jobs, well-paying jobs back to the industrial belt of America, and he failed to do so. He would argue that that's because he had to spend 4 years fighting off the rearguard action fought by the deep state around the Russiagate hoax and so on. But that is not a good enough excuse, because in that 4 years, he found the time to shower the corporate interests in America, the richest people in America, with undreamt of largesse in tax cuts. The stock market was booming, no doubt, but the factories were not turning. The factories and the jobs did not return. And the infrastructural crumbling of the United States was not put into reverse. And that's why if he loses these swing states to which I've referred, that's why he lost them. And so his populism had very real limits. But that doesn't mean that it didn't strike a chord with Americans. 71 million Americans voted for Donald Trump. 7 million more than had voted for him in 2016. His voting numbers in every demographic in the election are up, oftentimes up by 100%. He polled more votes amongst black people, more votes amongst women. 58% of American women voted for Donald Trump. Imagine that. Latinos, gay people, the gay vote for Donald Trump doubled from 14 to 28%. So the strategy of screaming racist, sexist, misogynist, and every ist you can imagine at Donald Trump did not succeed. The only segment of the population in which his vote went down was amongst white males, particularly white working class males. And that's for the reason to which I have just alluded. So 71 million Americans are on his side when he calls the mass media fake news. And just because it's Donald Trump that's saying it doesn't make it untrue. The media is fake news. It is a conspiracy against the interests of the people. It's a lie machine. And 71 million Americans agree with that. When he talks about the swamp of the political class that has spread out across the Washington, Virginia area, just like a swamp, 71 million Americans agree with that. They can see that there's a permanent state whose purpose is not to look out for them, not to look after them, but to look after themselves, to look out for themselves, to continually, through open door, revolving door politics, continually enrich themselves. And they know instinctively that, as Eisenhower in the 1950s warned us that there is a vast and overweening military industrial complex, the war industry, which seeks to bend American policy in its own interest, endlessly sowing the need for more and more war, more and more conflict, and more tooling up with the world's most expensive weaponry. They realize, whether they have concluded correctly from that realization is of course a moot point, that one of the reasons why the United States has these catastrophic, cataclysmic outcomes in the coronavirus pandemic is because the United States doesn't have a proper health service. The richest country in the world doesn't have a proper health service. They realize that the permanent political class, which has deprived them of that, something that almost every other developed country in the world has deprived them of that for their own selfish reasons. So we don't have a dog in the fight between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. We've got our own dog. Our dog is the interests of the working class people in America, whatever color they are, whatever their orientation, however they pray. We care nothing of such things. We believe that America needs a people's party that can stand out from the Tweedledee and Tweedledum of the Democrat and Republican parties and fight ceaselessly for the interests of the working people and concentrate on their own business at home rather than roaming around the world like a bull in a china shop, bringing what Diane Abbot likes to describe as democracy to the global south. Why is that important for us here in Britain? Well, because the model of capitalism employed in the United States is strikingly similar to the model of capitalism hegemonic here. Finance capital, globalized capital. Someone pointed out to me in an earlier broadcast I was doing today, the United Kingdom is a massive investor in the United States. Not only do we export to them, the biggest single country to which we export, but we are also massive investors in the United States economy. We in the Workers' Party believe that British capital should be invested here in Britain where it was made, building up the public realm, building up the standard of living of British people. But it's no accident that the two worst countries in the world in the coronavirus pandemic are Britain and the United States. Partly because of the same inherent underlying problems in the economy, partly because we've been heading towards an American-style National Health Service since the Margaret Thatcher era 40 years ago. We, under Labour and Conservative governments, have been privatizing, choking the National Health Service of funds, granting funds only when it came with the proviso of private enterprise in partnership with the public, which means the private sector picking the pockets of the public purse in the development of the health service. But also because the British and American governments, the British and American states, stand today almost bereft of public confidence, of public trust. More than any other European country, Britain has a ruling caste in which hardly anyone at all has reposed confidence. And every day that goes by of this disastrous year vindicates that lack of confidence. You know, when I was a kid I don't like to say this really because it doesn't show my father in the best light, but my father used to talk to me about corruption as a foreign vice. He'd say that countries like Italy were bottomlessly corrupt. And by implication, he would contrast it with Britain, where he believed corruption didn't exist. But just in the last few days, we have seen in the organs of the capitalist newspapers themselves, the Sunday Times in particular, the extraordinary extent to which corruption exists here in Britain. We have handed out almost uncountable billions of pounds to the cronies of the Conservative government, many of whom had never done a day's work in the field for which we were handing them billions. I mean, I thought the bottom had been reached when we gave a ferry contract to a company with no ferries in preparation for a no-deal Brexit. But we now know not only are we handing out the gigantic bonanza of coronavirus spend to people who have completely failed in the tasks that they were given in exchange for those billions, but we've got people in government going to private seminars and insider trading with the cronies, telling them which companies are going to get which contracts so that they can quickly buy shares in them. This is a level of corruption that knocks 1960s Italian corruption into a cocked hat. This is the corruption of our country, built on a rapidly escalating lack of trust, so that when the government asks us to do something or tells us to do something, nobody believes them, even if they're telling the truth. Nobody's ready to follow them. In countries, right-wing countries, like South Korea, when the government said, we've got a big problem here with coronavirus, we all must do this, and this, everybody followed them. And they did so because in South Korea, the people have more faith in their system and their political class. China was an even better example. China mobilized on a military scale, as if for a mass external invasion into their country, treated it as an existential threat to the people, to the state. And look what happened in response. Look how the Chinese people responded to their government. We're often told that in places like China, the government is somehow the oppressor, that the people are under the heel of the government. But that cannot be true if you view it through the prism of the response to the pandemic. Because the Chinese people vanquished the coronavirus in record quick time. And as we close this year of 2020, China is the only economy in the whole world that is actually growing, whilst all ours is falling off a cliff. Which brings me to the other part of our ruling elite. The politicians, the civil servants are one thing. But look at the behavior of our companies. Look how rank is the behavior of our companies. People taking the government's money, the public's money, and handing it out to their shareholders in dividends. Sainsbury's, for example. Sainsbury's received hundreds of millions from the British taxpayer and didn't put it into cutting prices or building new stores or employing new people. They gave it in a dividend, a special, extraordinary dividend to their shareholders. Look at the behavior of IKEA. Not a British company, of course, but in their stores in Britain, they're using the pandemic to sack people and re-employ them on lesser contracts, lesser wages, worse conditions. And that has been true of so many companies, from British Airways downwards. If this is the best that capitalism can do, why do we bother with them? This is the point of view of the Workers' Party. Why do we need these people? Why do we need to bankroll them only for them to then turn round and kick their own workforce in the teeth? What do they bring to the table that we could not do ourselves? We don't believe in 100% public ownership of the British economy. As I've said before, we think there are some things too specialist to be best employed by the state. But the vast majority of things in this country could be done by the people who are doing them now. It's not that Mr. IKEA comes and runs the store or helps you put the flat pack together. It's not that Mr. Sainsbury is bustling up and down the aisles helping you find the condiments. It's the workers that run these businesses. And the managers are workers too. These managers and these workers could run these businesses just as well, maybe better, if the store didn't belong to Sainsbury, but belonged to all the people together. The superiority of the publicly dominated, publicly directed economy is demonstrated daily by the economy and the society in China. And the inferiority of our model of capitalism is being demonstrated every day, none more dramatically than in this year of 2020. So we have big goals. We want a complete transformation of how things are in Britain, and a complete transformation in Britain's role in the world. But that doesn't mean we sit in an ivory tower, unwilling to get our hands dirty in everyday fights for an inch forward here, to stop an inch backwards there, for a better deal for our poor kids on school meals, for a coronavirus tax on the country's richest people, to provide £15 billion that can be pumped into the desperately needy parts of the society. That's why our coronavirus tax, ahead of everybody else, was such a big success. It was practical. We said we've got a real crisis here, and here is a small way in which a small number of people making a small contribution from their vast riches can make life better for the rest of us. It's why we got behind the exemplary Marcus Rashford campaign to get justice for 1 million kids, that's all. 1 million of the poorest kids in the land who were facing a Christmas holiday without school lunches, and therefore at risk of not properly eating at all. Having conceded that in the summer, the government sought to withdraw it over the Christmas holiday. But Marcus Rashford won. He won because of the basic decency of the vast majority of the British people, who don't want to see our children hungry, who know that it's not moral for 1 million children to be hungry in a rich country. and the more prescient of them know that it's not healthy for the rest of us either. Of course, hungry children are children that don't study properly at school, who therefore will not leave school able to do the things and meet the challenges of the 21st century, its third decade, and therefore we as a country will be poorer. Everybody knows, every sensible person knows the wisdom of the old wives' tale that a stitch in time saves 9. If kids don't prosper at school, they're more likely to fall prey to antisocial behavior and gangs and crime and drugs, and end up us having to pay £30,000 a year to keep them in jail, dearer than it would be to send them to Eton. Most people can sensibly see that as being in our own enlightened national self-interest. And that's why Marcus Rashford won. And he has won. He's won another stupendous victory. And we in the Workers' Party are proud to have been in the front ranks of those campaigning for justice for our poor children. Campaigning doesn't mean today what it meant last year at this time, when we could all swarm into the city centres and door to door and in the streets, distributing leaflets, collecting signatures, recruiting members and so on. All of that is greatly reduced, although the Workers' Party people, to my amazement, are still out on many streets. I see their pictures in the papers. But the campaign online and using the platforms available to us, like this one, and like the social media platforms on which we perform quite well, I would say, better than anybody else on the left, we helped Marcus Rashford to win that great victory, which has provided some relief for the poorest of our children. But as we approach now the end of 2020, we approach something else also, to which I must now turn. It's not a secret that the Workers' Party supported Brexit because we believe in Britain as a united and independent country. You don't have to have agreed with us about that to be in the Workers' Party now, because that decision has already been taken. And we must now make the best Britain that we can in this Brexit era. Things have been complicated by Biden's apparent victory. He is a potential spanner in the works in our ongoing negotiations with the European Union in advance of leaving on the 31st of December. The Obama, Clinton, Biden gang never liked Brexit. You'll recall that the crooner came to London to warn us before the Brexit vote that if we dared to vote for Brexit, we'd go to the back of the queue when it came to a trade deal with the United States of America. The Tories faffed around for years under Theresa May and for a year now under Boris Johnson. If they wanted a trade deal with the United States, they could have had one if they hadn't been, in Theresa May's case at the very least, seeking actually to sabotage Brexit before we got to it. But leave that aside. I've got to tell you, I don't care whether there's a trade deal with the United States of America. We don't have one now, and they're our biggest single export market. I don't care if there's a deal with the European Union. At the very least, if there is no deal, we'll save 40,000 million pounds. 40,000 million pounds in the divorce settlement. Because, of course, if there's no divorce agreement, there's no divorce settlement. I don't care whether there is a deal or there isn't a deal, and no deal is better than a bad deal. But it's quite likely that we are going to sign a deal which is in part bad with the European Union, and probably in the next few days. Our fishing communities will be sold out. I suspect that we will make concessions on state aid to industry. Imagine, we've got a Tory government in Britain holding out for the right to give state aid to ailing industries in Britain, while the European Union, that paragon of liberal social democracy, is demanding that we ban all state aid to industrial enterprise in Britain. I believe that may well be sold out also. Booby traps will have been left behind by the European Union, and one day we will have to defuse them, to destroy them. But what is lacking above all is what we are trying to provide, which is a vision of the new Britain, a vision of the Britain we can be, freed from the shackles of the European Union on things like state aid, and freed from, I hope, I earnestly pray, freed from the domination of the United States of America's foreign policy. Because we in the Workers' Party want a united Britain, yes, but we also want an independent Britain, free to make relations with everyone in the world that we freely choose to do, free to reject sanctions imposed by others on their enemies, permanent or temporary, free to build a society to be proud of. And that vision is encompassed in our 10-point program, which I urge you to read. It gives flesh to the bones that I'm setting out here today. It gives a picture in color of what Britain can be, will be in the future, if we can win the political arguments, if we can persuade people like you to join us in the Workers' Party of Britain. A free, united, independent Britain with an independent foreign policy, an automatic enemy to none, an automatic ally to none, following our own interests, and in the same way that those people reacted to the campaign for the free school meals for poor kids, an enlightened sense of what our self-interest is. Because nobody wants a beggar for their neighbor. Not just because it's undignified to the human condition that people should be beggars, should be paupers, should be struggling, but because it's in our interest to give a hand up to other people, to extend the hand of friendship towards other people, because later they'll learn our language, they'll imbibe our cultural output, they'll buy our goods, they'll buy our services, and all boats can rise simultaneously. All boats can rise together. That's the future that the Workers' Party sees. So we fight every inch of the way for the real needs of our people now, whilst painting the path to a better Britain in the future. We believe in it. We hope to persuade you of the rightness of it also. I hope you'll follow us on Twitter. I hope you'll at least write to us and ask for our program and our literature. And above all, I hope that you will join us in the great fight that lies ahead to build a new Jerusalem here in this green and pleasant land. Thank you for watching and listening to this party political broadcast